Sports Podcast. I'm George Gerbo. A reminder that you can find all of our sports coverage at the Washington Times at washingtontimes.com/sports, on Twitter as well at WashTimesSports, and find this podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms by searching District of Sports. We have a special edition, Washington football team edition of the District of Sports, and of course, nobody better to do that with than our Washington football team beat reporter, Matt Paris, who joins me. Matt, how's it going?
Hey, it's going great.
Excellent. WFT wall-to-wall coverage because we are finally 2 weeks now into camp. We have the first week of the preseason coming up, the Hall of Fame game last week between Pittsburgh and Dallas, and now the rest of the NFL teams will get into action over the next couple of days. That includes Washington, who visits New England on Thursday. There was no preseason last year, of course, because of the pandemic, so we're kind of getting a little bit of the why are we doing this and why do we have to do this type of thing this year. But there's only 3 games this year because the regular season has been extended by an additional week. So you've got a little bit less preseason, and we'll see how that plays into or makes a difference when we get further down the line into the regular season. But Matt, I guess the first place to start is just you've been out in Ashburn and in Richmond covering the Washington football team, and just basic observations or kind of like a writ large, what have you seen from this team that was kind of a surprise playoff entrant last year as a division winner and a loser in the wild card round to Tampa. But what so far has there been that stood out to you and just your overall kind of impressions since 2 weeks now of training camp and practice are in the books?
Yeah, I think it's really starting to come together for them. I mean, you kind of look at this roster, there's still some holes on it. This isn't a perfect roster by any means, but there's definitely some talent here. A lot more talent than what Ron Rivera, it seemed like he had going into his first year in Washington. And so, by bringing in a guy like quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think he raises the ceiling of Washington's offense by quite a bit. It looks like he's starting to really find a rhythm with Terry McLaurin and Logan Thomas in particular. And then this defense is going to be really good this year. I mean, they were a top 5 unit last year, top 2 according to one metric. And it's just a matter of, can they get back to that level? They face better quarterbacks in the upcoming season, so maybe they're worse slightly statistically, but I don't think that will represent their talent, because this is a pretty stacked group. Their weaknesses too have improved, or they've addressed their weaknesses. So I think it's starting to come together, and I think this is a team that does have some potential here.
Yeah, and by virtue of by being the number 1 overall, but by being the division winner in the NFC East, you get those 3 other division winners are part of your schedule now. That includes Green Bay and New Orleans for Washington. So that the quarterback competition does get a little bit tougher for teams that Washington will see on the road. You mentioned Ryan Fitzpatrick. God bless him, the journeyman for his 9th team now. Washington will be 17 years in the NFL. And of course, he spent the last 2 in Miami and earned a lot of praise in helping the Dolphins kind of as a 1A, 1B situation with Tua Tagovailoa, the Dolphins' first-round draft pick last year out of Alabama, and just this kind of hybrid model where he came off the bench sometimes, he started sometimes, and it worked out for Miami in many ways last year. And you mentioned this first game and what Ron Rivera is looking for in your recent article. He said consistency on offense, which is probably the biggest thing for fans of this team that watched them last year and play so well, as you mentioned, on defense. It's about getting, if you watch this team down the stretch, it's like, man, if they could just get a few of these things to click here and there. You don't need them to score 30 points a game, but if they could score 24, they would have been in a lot more of those games and would have won more of those games. So it's not even an incremental improvement, a big incremental improvement, just a little bit of something. Does Fitzpatrick give them that advantage over Taylor Heineke? Do you see kind of I know we're very early on here and we'll probably get more details from this game on Thursday, but Ron Rivera says he intends to play his starters, which is something that other teams around the league are kind of intimating that they're not going to. Green Bay says they're not going to play Aaron Rodgers. The Texans are not going to play Deshaun Watson. So Ron Rivera, with a team that maybe needs to find its footing a little bit more on offense, it says he's intent to play his starters. How is that going to go on Thursday against New England?
Yeah, he was pretty cagey the other day about the amount that the starters will play, but Rivera is old school in the sense that I think he believes that the preseason is good for building that chemistry to get on the same page, work through the kinks. So I think for the first preseason game, even though there are 3 instead of 4, I think you can still probably expect a series or 2 from the starters. That would be my guess. It's just a matter of he wants to see everything else. Jelly's talked a lot about when the lights come on, how are these guys gonna react to the speed of a full game? You look at a guy like Sam Cosmi, who's their rookie right tackle, he's had to go up against Chase Young and Montez Sweat every day in practice. Well, does that make him more prepared for a situation like this, or is he going to have that learning curve? So I think he's watching for those sorts of things.
And it's funny to mention Sweat and Chase Young. They've kind of been the only in Chase in their second season being kind of the leaders on this football team. It's a team that doesn't have Ryan Kerrigan anymore, who left to Philadelphia in the offseason. And guys that are young there, but guys who have proven themselves as kind of doing it the right way and on the field and off the field. They've got a little bit, one of your recent stories a couple days ago, they've got a little bit of a swagger to them, and it's kind of almost a good back and forth, kind of needling each other among these guys, not necessarily to the point of too much anger. It's kind of been, based on your coverage and some of the clips I've seen, pretty animated during camp at different times, but just kind of trying to build, they're trying to be, in my opinion, kind of step up as a vocal and on the field, off the field and on the field leadership for this team, now that there are some gaps in that, especially on the defensive side with Kerrigan gone.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just look at it like they embrace their ambition. Montez Sweat was talking the other day about how he wants to break the tandem sack record, and he didn't even know what the number was, but it's 39. The Chris Dolman and Keith Millard had it in 1989 with the Minnesota Vikings. It would be kind of shocking if they combined for that, because they would each need around 20 sacks to break that.
For both of them, yeah.
I don't think that's attainable, but it just shows that they're really, they have big goals. They want to live up to those expectations, and they really do like firing up the rest of the defense by pushing the offense. Like poor J.D. McKissick in this camp, who's just like a smaller type running back, a receiver. Montez Sweat really chases him down, has pushed him after a few plays. Like they just seem to have a good time going back and forth, and McKissick embraces it as well. So it's just that healthy competition that you want to see during camp, and I think they found their swagger, particularly after last year, because they did realize kind of how dominant of a unit this can be at times, and I think they're really feeding off that.
Yeah, let's stay on defense as well. Another guy, a young guy that's going to insert in there in the middle of that defense is Jamin Davis, who's the first round, 19th overall pick linebacker out of Kentucky, and seemed based on the comments that Ron Rivera's made and through his practicing so far, that ready to take on that role as kind of being the field general in the middle of this Washington defense that is going to be relied on, at least until the offense comes around, or if it doesn't get going as much as people would like, is going to be relied on to win them some games as it did last year. And to have a rookie in the middle of that, is that concerning at all for Rivera, but or for Davis himself, or does he seem to be able to, no, I've got this, and this is a role that he's ready to take on, just a few months removed from being drafted?
Yeah, I don't think it's concerning at all. I mean, they drafted him with the expectation that he would play a lot, and I believe he will. Like, even if you go outside the base package, most teams run sub packages now, particularly nickel, and that involves 2 linebackers instead of 3, and he'll be one of the 2. He's really showed a maturity and being able to learn things quick, to call plays in the middle. This is a role that he had in college as well, I believe. So, that they started him in the middle to try and get him acclimated as fast as possible by having him do stuff that he was used to. But he's really learned the ins and outs of this defense, and I think they're really starting to. I think he's really starting to come along.
And for a guy, 102 tackles last year, third most tackles by a defensive player in the Southeastern Conference. It seems like probably one of the things they're going to count on is for him to stretch that linebacking core a little bit. That's good. You've got a lot of big guys up front and not so much in the way of pass coverage speed. Is somebody that's going to be able to kind of trail with a receiver across the middle or in the slot?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they really liked his versatility and eventually to be able to play the other linebacker spots as well. But, they brought in Luke Kuechly this offseason to talk with the young linebacker room, and Davis was able to pick Luke Kuechly's brain a little bit. And so, he really, I think, took a lot from that conversation. And another guy, too, to keep an eye on is Cole Holcomb. He made some pretty good strides last year and seems a lot more comfortable, particularly in pass coverage this year as well. He's matched up with tight end Logan Thomas pretty well at times. And so, Ron Rivera's defense really relies on speedy, rangy linebackers who can drop back in pass coverage and fly through gaps. And, Luke Kuechly and Thomas Davis in Carolina were the gold standard of that. Mm-hmm. And, Jamin Davis has a long way to go before he's compared to Luke Kuechly, but I think they're trying to replicate something similar here.
And of course, Kuechly playing for Rivera when Rivera was the coach in Charlotte. Let's switch to the other side of the ball on offense, and probably the place I'm looking for to see some development and just see if these guys can. It always seems to be the place for Washington is wide receiver. Wide receiver is a fun position in this town because you've had a lot of guys over the years from Santana Moss and Antoine Randall. You've had a lot of speed on offense, but sometimes you're looking for more consistency, and you've got a really good story on a guy who's trying to do that in Steven Sims, who's out there, as you write, on the jugs machine, catching 200 balls, coming at him high speed after practice. Little bit of a disappointment last year. He was banged up with some injuries, only 265 yards last year. But from your reporting and from some of the clips I've seen, the biggest difference, I think, for him, kind of to mention that speed with guys like Terry McLaurin, he seems to be getting off the line a little bit better. And the catching will come around, especially when you're going to put yourself through 200 reps at the end of practice. But it seems like the biggest advancement and jump for him was getting a little bit stronger in his legs and in his speed.
Yeah, I think part of that is he's healthier this year. He was dealing with toe problems last year. He missed a few games. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but he really fell out of favor in this offense. He really struggled with drops as a punt returner, and as a rookie in 2019, that was his calling card of, this guy can be a dynamic returner. He returned one on a kickoff return for a touchdown. And Washington hadn't had that in about 4 years. So, this was a guy that it seemed like he was going to be part of this young nucleus with Terry McLaurin and a guy like Kelvin Harmon, who also now has to fight for a roster spot. But, Sims is getting back to it. I don't know if he'll make the roster. Receiver is probably the most crowded position in terms of, who are they going to keep? Are they going to keep 6 guys? Are they going to keep 7? But he's definitely made his mark, and I think he could make the roster if he shows out in these preseason games, if he's able to develop into a steady returner again and be that kind of slot threat for them at certain points.
Let's mention another guy in a crowded Washington receiver room, and that's Curtis Samuel, who's been out with both a groin injury and was also on the COVID-19 reserve list for a while. You'll recall he signed a 3-year, $34.5 million contract in March, coming from also, once again, the Carolina Panthers. The pipeline is deep in the last few seasons.
You'll sense a theme there.
Just right. Let's go right down 95 and then cut over to Charlotte to get there. 77 receptions, 851 yards last year. Do you have, or is Ron Rivera given kind of an idea when he'll be able to return and impact and be a part of this receiving unit.
Look, the line has been all along that they aren't concerned, that they're treating this as cautious, to be as cautious as possible, so on and so forth. But the reality is, he's pretty much missed 2 months of football. I mean, obviously, you have that 6-week gap between mini camp and the start of training camp, but he wasn't out there for mandatory mini camp. Catching COVID really complicates things because you don't know how much he's able to do in terms of rehab on that groin. Is he further behind now because he wasn't able to, presumably, to come to the facility every day and work with trainers and that sort of thing. So, Ron Rivera has mentioned that, you'd love to get him out there by the third preseason game, but that's still a few weeks away. So, yeah. I mean, who knows when he'll actually return to practice? Does this carry over into week one? Even if he plays in week one, like, when is he going to be 100%? We've seen so many free agent receivers here signed and kind of just hamper their way through Washington with injuries. I'm thinking of a guy like Paul Richardson or even Deshaun Jackson, who was really productive, but he was always kind of hurt. So, you would hope that that's not the case with Curtis Samuel. They're pretty confident that he obviously knows the playbook and can get up to speed running, but how fast is he going to be if he's limited by this groin injury?
The other two preseason games on the schedule for Washington are August 20th, and both of them are home games. August 20th against Cincinnati and home to Baltimore, which has kind of been a traditional end of the preseason matchup for Washington over the last couple of years. August 28th. And with those two games, they'll get good opportunities to measure themselves against young rosters that are coming along. Baltimore, of course, a little bit further ahead than Cincinnati is with Lamar Jackson, and Cincinnati, of course, with Joe Burrow eventually coming back from his knee injury last year. That kind of leads me to my last question, Matt, is how do we, I know he's not indicated much in the way of starters, but in terms of how much we're going to see Taylor Heinicke, the quarterback, Old Dominion product, who came in and played admirably in the playoff game and after Alex Smith got injured in the final regular season game last year to win the division, how much should we? It feels like I think you'd see him a lot because you bring in Fitzpatrick and you know what you're going to get out of him. But probably the biggest thing for Washington this season is Ryan Fitzpatrick obviously is not your long-term guy in his 17th year.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing we've learned from camp, and I don't know how much of a surprise this actually was, is this isn't really a quarterback competition. Taylor Heinicke got some first-team reps early into camp, but those have gone away. Heinicke has looked really, really rough in practice in certain stretches. He admitted that he's having trouble throwing left, which isn't the most reassuring thing in the whole world if you are a fan of Washington. But he was a little dinged up the other day. I think he's fine. He practiced yesterday. But for the first game specifically, I would lean toward us seeing more of Steven Montez, who is their fourth string quarterback, currently their third string quarterback, because Kyle Allen is nursing an ankle injury. He hurt his previously fractured ankle. He aggravated that again during the practice last week. So he's missed a week plus. Don't know when Kyle Allen is returning, but Steven Montez, I think, is going to get a lot of run in this game. If he doesn't come in the first half, I would imagine he plays all of the second half. I think we're just going to see a lot of him. Their last practice on Tuesday seemed like he was getting a lot of reps as part of the scout team and kind of running through things. So I would say we see a lot of Steven Montez.
All right. It's a team that looks a little bit different, especially on offense, from the team that won the division last year, and we'll have a better idea of what Washington looks like and where they will go moving forward through this preseason after their matchup in New England on Thursday. You, of course, will have coverage for us at washingtontimes.com/sports and as well on Twitter, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Excellent. At Matthew_Paris on Twitter, as always, for all of Matt's stories and news and notes from covering the WFT. And of course, at Wash Time Sports on Twitter is where you can find all of our outstanding sports coverage. A reminder to follow and subscribe for free to the Washington Times District of Sports podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. That includes on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, and more. Just search District of Sports. For Matt, I'm George. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.